The Pinky Promise Under the Oak Tree. The sleepy village of Willowbrook had a charm of its own, a place untouched by the rush of the world beyond its rolling green hills. A single winding road led into town, flanked by fields of wildflowers and tall, whispering trees. Time seemed to move slower here, where neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles and children ran freely, chasing dreams under the golden sun. At the very heart of the village stood an ancient oak tree, a towering giant with gnarled roots that had embraced the earth for centuries. Its branches stretched wide like arms offering comfort, casting speckled shade over the small wooden bench nestled beneath it. It was here that Elena Matthews, an adventurous 8-year-old girl with chestnut curls and honey-brown eyes, first met Liam Carter, a quiet boy with windswept blonde hair and deep hazel eyes, who preferred books over people. Elena was the type of girl who spoke to birds, ran barefoot through meadows, and built castles out of fallen leaves. Liam, on the other hand, was more reserved, always carrying a small notebook in which he scribbled down thoughts he never spoke aloud. That day, the summer sun bathed Willowbrook in a golden glow. The scent of fresh bread from the village bakery mingled with the warm, earthy aroma of the oak tree. The distant laughter of other children playing near the river echoed through the air. Elena had spent the morning weaving a tiny crown of daisies, her fingers sticky with sap from the wildflowers she had picked along the way. She hummed a tune her grandmother used to sing as she balanced barefoot on one of the tree's sprawling roots. Then, she saw him. A boy sitting cross-legged in the shade, his back resting against the rough bark, completely absorbed in a book. Elena's curiosity sparked. She had seen him before. He was the quiet one, always sitting by himself at school, always staring at the world as if he were trying to understand it. Without hesitation, she plopped down next to him. "What are you reading?" she asked, tilting her head. Liam blinked, startled. It took him a second to process that someone had actually spoken to him. He hesitated before turning the book toward her. "The Adventures of Peter and the Lost Kingdom," he mumbled. Elena gasped. "I love that story. The part where Peter finds the hidden door in the castle, that's the best." Liam's lips twitched into the smallest smile. "You've read it?" She nodded eagerly. 3 times. Books are like secret doors, aren't they? They take you to places no one else can see. Liam's eyes lit up, and in that moment, he realized she understood something most people didn't. Maybe she wasn't like the others. For the next few minutes, they talked about books, about dragons and hidden worlds, about magic and faraway lands. For the first time in a long time, Liam felt like someone saw him. Not as the quiet boy who never spoke, but as a storyteller, a dreamer. Then, suddenly, Elena jumped up and stretched her arms toward the sky. "We should make a promise," she declared. Liam frowned. "A promise?" She grinned, spinning in a circle before stopping in front of him. "Yeah. A forever promise." Liam tilted his head, intrigued but cautious. "What kind of promise?" Elena took a deep breath, her voice turning serious, like she was about to reveal the most important secret in the world. "One day, when we grow up, we'll get married." Liam's eyes widened. "Married?" She nodded, eyes full of certainty. "Yes. That way, we'll never be alone. We'll always have each other. No matter what." Liam's mind raced. He had never thought about marriage before. It seemed like something far away, something only grown-ups worried about. But the way Elena said it made it sound real. Safe. Like a home he had never realized he wanted. She held out her pinky finger. "We have to seal the promise. Pinky promises are unbreakable, you know." Liam hesitated for only a moment before hooking his pinky around hers. "Forever," he whispered. "Forever," she vowed. A gust of wind swept through the oak tree, rustling the leaves like whispered secrets. In that moment, beneath the sprawling branches, two children made a vow that would shape their destinies in ways they could never imagine. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning their future. "We'll live in a big house with a library," Elena decided. "And a piano," Liam added. "Oh. And a tree house. Can we have a telescope too?" "Of course." Their laughter filled the air, blending with the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves. But the world had a way of testing promises, even the ones made under ancient trees. And neither of them knew that life was about to pull them apart. A shadow on the horizon. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elena's mother called out from the village square. "Elena, time to come home." Elena sighed, reluctant to leave. "I have to go." Liam nodded. "Me too." But before she ran off, she untied a small red ribbon from her wrist, the same one she had been wearing all summer. It was slightly frayed at the edges, but she didn't care. "Here." She pressed it into Liam's hand. "So you won't forget." Liam stared at the ribbon, feeling the weight of its meaning. "I won't." She beamed. "Good. Because I'll wait for you. No matter what." And with that, she dashed off, her curls bouncing as she disappeared down the village path. Liam remained beneath the oak tree, staring at the ribbon in his palm. He didn't know why, but he felt like this moment was important, like it would stay with him forever. Then, the wind blew, and a single leaf drifted down, landing beside him. Somewhere deep in his heart, a whisper told him that nothing would ever be the same again. The distance that grew between them. The promise made beneath the great oak tree echoed in both of their hearts as they grew older. But promises are fragile things, especially when tested by time and distance. It started with a whisper. Liam's father had received a job offer in the city, one too great to refuse. His family wasn't just moving to the next town over. They were moving far away, to a place where the streets weren't lined with cobblestones and the sky was pierced by towering buildings instead of trees. Liam sat on his bed the night before the move, the red ribbon Elena had given him curled in his palm. His hazel eyes studied its frayed edges, his chest tightening. How could he leave? The next morning, Elena ran to the oak tree, heart pounding, desperate to say goodbye. But by the time she reached it, Liam's family's car was already disappearing down the dusty road, a trail of unsettled earth rising in its wake. She stood there, frozen. He was gone. Letters of love and silence. At first, the letters came frequently. Liam wrote about the overwhelming buzz of city life, the crowded streets, the never-ending noise, the way the air smelled of rain and pavement instead of fresh flowers and warm bread. Elena wrote about Willowbrook, about how the oak tree still stood tall, how the wind still carried their laughter, even though it was just a memory now. She told him she still kept their promise. But as time passed, the letters slowed. Liam's father disapproved of distractions. "You'll make new friends," he said. "Willowbrook is the past. Your future is here." At first, Liam resisted. But the weight of school, piano lessons, and his father's expectations pressed on him. Life moved faster in the city, and soon, the letters turned from weekly to monthly, and then they stopped altogether. For Elena, every unanswered letter was like a small crack in her heart. At night, she sat by her window, watching the stars and whispering their childhood dreams to the wind. She still wore the red ribbon, tying it around her wrist every morning like a silent vow. But the silence grew louder. Months turned into years, and the boy who once promised forever had become just another ghost of the past. The dreamer and the pianist. By the time Elena turned 18, she had poured her heart into writing. She filled notebooks upon notebooks with stories, tales of childhood love, of whispered promises, of red ribbons and old oak trees. She wrote about a boy who loved books and a girl who believed in forever. And one day, she promised herself, she would share their story with the world. Meanwhile, Liam had become someone unrecognizable. His father's dreams for him had come true. He was a pianist, a prodigy, a star in the making. He played in grand concert halls, his music filling rooms that were far bigger than the small village he had left behind. But no matter how many people clapped for him, his heart felt empty. Every time his fingers danced over the keys, he found himself playing the same melody, a soft, bittersweet tune only he and Elena knew. He didn't understand why. Until one evening, after a long performance, he found himself sitting alone in his apartment, staring at an old shoebox. Inside was a faded piece of red fabric, worn and frayed but still untouched by time. Liam's breath hitched. He had tried to forget. He had tried to move on. But some promises can't be broken. Fate's unfinished business. At 22, Elena published her first novel, a heartbreaking love story about childhood sweethearts who were separated by fate, only to find their way back to each other in unexpected ways. She never mentioned names. But the story was undeniably theirs. The book became a bestseller, its emotional weight striking readers around the world. Producers fought for the rights to turn it into a movie, and within months, it was set to hit the big screen. It should have been the happiest moment of her life. But all she could think about was him. Did Liam know? Had he read it? Did he recognize their story? Then, something she never expected happened. The producer reached out with exciting news. They had found the perfect musician to compose the movie's score. A pianist known for his deeply emotional pieces, someone whose music felt like it was telling a story even without words. His name? Liam Carter. Elena's hands trembled as she read the email. The past she had buried was coming back. And she wasn't sure she was ready for it. The truth she never knew. The night before she was set to meet the film's music composer, Elena received a letter. Not an email. A letter. She stared at the envelope, her heartbeat uneven. The handwriting was messy but painfully familiar. With shaky hands, she opened it. Elena. I don't know if you'll even read this. Maybe you've moved on. Maybe you've forgotten. But I haven't. I never stopped thinking about you. I never stopped wondering why you stopped writing. I found out the truth too late. My father, he kept your letters from me. He told me you stopped writing first. And I was stupid enough to believe him. Elena's breath caught. Her fingers gripped the paper tightly, her mind spinning. All these years, had it all been a lie? She continued reading, her pulse racing. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I had to tell you. Every song I've ever played, every melody I've ever written. It was always about you. If you don't want to see me, I understand. But I need you to know. I never stopped waiting. Tears spilled onto the page as Elena clutched the letter against her chest. The boy she had loved, the boy she had mourned, had never left her after all. The past wasn't over. It had just been waiting for its moment to return. The reunion that never happened. The night before the first official meeting for the film adaptation of her book, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the letter from Liam crumpled in her hand. Her chest ached. The past had unraveled in a way she never expected. For years, she had resented Liam, believing he had abandoned her. But now, she knew the truth, his father had kept them apart, stealing years they could never get back. She wanted to feel relief. She wanted to feel hope. Instead, she felt afraid. What if they weren't the same people anymore? She had become a successful author, shaping worlds with her words. He had become a world-renowned pianist, pouring his emotions into music. Would they still understand each other? Would she still see the boy who once hooked his pinky around hers under the oak tree? Or was she about to meet a stranger wearing his face? A first meeting years too late. The next afternoon, Elena walked into the high-rise office where the film team was waiting. The walls were glass, offering a stunning view of the city skyline, but she barely noticed. Her heart pounded as she spotted the back of a tall figure near the window. Liam. He was different. Broader. Taller. Older. His blonde hair was neatly styled, and he wore an expensive suit that fit too well on someone she used to know as a quiet boy who loved stories more than people. She swallowed hard, steeling herself. Miss Matthews, the director greeted her warmly, breaking her daze. We're thrilled to have you here. She nodded, her throat dry. The moment Liam turned around, their eyes locked. And for a split second, the world stopped. His gaze softened, but also carried a weight, an apology, a longing, a hesitation. Elena, he whispered, almost as if he was afraid she wasn't real. But before she could say anything, the producer clapped his hands together, breaking the moment. Let's begin. Liam's jaw tensed. There was so much to say, but no time to say it. And just like that, the first meeting of their reunion became nothing more than a boardroom discussion, their unspoken words drowned out by movie executives talking about budgets and release dates. Elena forced herself to act professional, speaking about the story as if it wasn't hers. Theirs. Liam did the same, nodding as they talked about musical themes, but his hands were clenched into fists under the table. He needed to talk to her alone. A storm brewing. By the time the meeting ended, Elena was the first to leave, heading straight to the elevator. But Liam wasn't letting her walk away. Not again. Elena, wait. His voice chased after her. She hesitated, just for a second, but kept walking. Liam quickened his pace, catching up before the elevator doors could close. He stepped inside just as they slid shut. For the first time in almost a decade, they were alone. The air inside the elevator was thick with tension. Neither of them spoke at first. The city moved past the glass walls around them, but neither of them noticed. It was just them. Liam swallowed, his voice strained. You didn't say anything. Elena finally turned to him, her eyes burning. What did you expect me to say? He exhaled sharply. I don't know. Anything. Just, not silence. Her laugh was bitter. Kind of ironic, isn't it? Liam flinched. He deserved that. The elevator dinged, but neither of them moved. Elena, he said again, his voice softer. I never stopped thinking about you. Her fingers curled into fists. And yet, you never came back. I didn't know, he admitted, guilt-lacing every word. I thought you stopped caring. Elena turned to face him fully, her voice trembling. I wrote to you. For years. He closed his eyes for a second. I know. I know that now. But back then, my father. I don't care about your father, Liam. Her voice cracked. You should have found me. Liam took a step closer. I tried. She scoffed. Did you? His jaw tightened. Do you know how many times I almost called you? How many times I walked past bookstores, hoping to see you inside? How many times I played our song on stage, wishing you could hear it? Elena's breath caught. Liam's hazel eyes darkened with pain. You weren't the only one hurting. For the first time since she had opened his letter, she saw it, the regret, the grief, the weight of years lost. But it didn't erase her own pain. Elena looked down at her wrist. Even now, after all these years, she still wore the red ribbon. Liam's gaze followed hers, his breath hitching when he saw it. You kept it. She swallowed hard. I didn't mean to. He reached for it instinctively, but she pulled back. Liam's face fell. Elena, His voice was barely a whisper. "Do you still believe in us?" A lump formed in her throat. She didn't know the answer. The elevator doors slid open. Elena stepped out first, but before walking away, she turned back to him. "I don't know who you are anymore, Liam." Then, she was gone. And for the second time in his life, Liam watched her walk away. The fire that followed. Liam was restless that night. He sat at his piano, fingers hovering over the keys, but he couldn't play. His mind kept replaying Elena's voice, her eyes, the way she still wore that damn ribbon but refused to let him touch it. So much had been left unsaid. He wasn't going to lose her again. He grabbed his phone and typed a message. "Liam, meet me at the oak tree. Tonight." He hesitated for a moment before hitting send. Minutes passed. Then hours. No reply. Maybe she wasn't coming. But then. Elena, midnight. His heart pounded. This time, he wouldn't let her go. The truth behind the silence. The village of Willowbrook had changed over the years, but some things remained untouched by time, like the ancient oak tree standing at its heart. The night was thick with silence, interrupted only by the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional rustling of the leaves. A full moon hung in the sky, bathing the world in an eerie silver glow. Elena stood under the tree, arms wrapped around herself. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying memories of childhood laughter, whispered secrets, and pinky promises long forgotten. She didn't know why she had come. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the ghosts of the past refusing to let her go. Or maybe, a part of her still believed in him. Footsteps approached from the path behind her. She knew who it was before she turned. Liam. He looked different in the moonlight, tired, hesitant, but undeniably familiar. The same boy who once sat beneath this tree, reading books and dreaming of a future with her. The same boy who had disappeared. Elena, he breathed out, as if he still couldn't believe she was real. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "You came." "I had to." His eyes softened. "You said you didn't know me anymore. So. I wanted to remind you." Her heart clenched. Remind her of what? The love they once had? The pain that followed? The stars blinked above them as silence stretched between them, neither knowing how to begin. Then Liam took a step forward. "Do you still wear it?" Elena knew exactly what he meant. She hesitated, then slowly lifted her wrist. The red ribbon was still there, frayed and faded with time. Liam's gaze softened as he reached out, but before his fingers could touch it, she pulled back. His throat tightened. "Why do you still wear it, if you won't even let me touch it?" She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "I don't know." He studied her, as if searching for the girl he once knew. "Did you mean it?" She frowned. "Mean what?" "The promise we made." His voice was raw. "When we were kids. Did you ever mean it?" Her chest ached. How could he ask that? "You think I didn't?" she whispered. Liam ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I don't know what to think, Elena. 1 minute, we were everything to each other. And then, you disappeared." Elena's eyes flashed. "I disappeared?" He nodded. "You stopped writing." She let out a bitter laugh. "I wrote to you for years, Liam. Years. You just never wrote back." His jaw clenched. "I never got your letters." Her hands curled into fists. "And whose fault was that?" His expression darkened. "Not mine." She laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "No? You never questioned why I suddenly stopped. You just accepted it and moved on." "I didn't move on," he snapped, taking a step closer. "I waited. I looked for you in every damn bookstore, in every city I played in. I searched, Elena. She wanted to believe him. But she had spent too many nights waiting for answers that never came. Her voice trembled. You should have come back. His face fell. I thought you didn't want me to. The wind howled around them, the leaves above whispering the truth neither of them had been ready to face. Then, finally, Liam spoke the words that had been haunting him for years. My father kept your letters from me. His voice broke. He wanted me to forget you. Elena sucked in a sharp breath. She had suspected it after reading his letter. But hearing him say it aloud made it real. He told me you stopped writing first, Liam continued, his eyes shining with anger, not at her, but at the man who had stolen their years. He said you'd moved on, that you didn't want to waste time on some boy who had left. Elena's heart pounded. She had spent so long hating Liam for leaving her behind. But now, she realized they had both been victims. She turned away, blinking back tears. Why didn't you fight for us? She whispered. Liam let out a shuddering breath. I thought I had lost you. She bit her lip, forcing herself to stay strong. We lost so much time, Liam. His fingers twitched at his sides. But we can get it back. She closed her eyes. It's not that simple. Liam stepped closer, until he was right in front of her. His voice was barely a whisper. What if it is? She opened her eyes, and for a second, just a second, she saw the boy she used to love. But the wounds ran too deep. She shook her head. You don't get to just walk back into my life and expect everything to be okay. Liam's jaw tensed. I don't expect anything. But I need to know, he swallowed hard. Do you still love me? The question knocked the air from her lungs. Did she? She had spent so many years believing he was her greatest heartbreak. But standing here, under the same tree where it all began, she wasn't sure if he was her heartbreak, or her unfinished story. She couldn't answer. Not yet. Instead, she untied the red ribbon from her wrist. Liam's breath hitched as she slowly placed it in his palm. She held his gaze, her voice trembling. If you want to prove that this still means something, Liam, don't just say it. Show me. Then, before she could let her emotions betray her, she turned and walked away. And this time, Liam didn't let her go. He clutched the red ribbon, his heart pounding. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. And he would fight for her this time. No matter what it took. The music that tied them together. The weight of a ribbon. Liam sat on the steps of his hotel balcony, the red ribbon clenched in his fingers. The same ribbon that had once lived on Elena's wrist for years. The same ribbon she had placed in his palm last night. Her words still echoed in his head. If you want to prove this still means something, don't just say it. Show me. Show her. He didn't sleep that night. His mind was a hurricane of memories and regrets. So many years lost. So many chances stolen. But this time, he wouldn't lose her. A grand gesture that meant nothing. The next morning, Elena avoided him. She drowned herself in work, sitting in the film production office, pretending to be interested in the new casting choices. But no matter how much she distracted herself, she felt him. Liam. Sitting across the room, silent, watching, waiting. And then, out of nowhere, the film director clapped his hands together. We have a surprise, he announced. Liam, we hear you composed something special for the film score. Something personal. Elena's stomach dropped. Liam stood up, adjusting his sleeves, then moved toward the grand piano in the corner of the room. She froze. No. He wouldn't. But he did. The moment his fingers touched the keys, a melody filled the room. Soft. Familiar. Heart-wrenching. It was their song. The one he used to play when they were kids. The one that used to belong to only them. Her heart cracked open. He remembered. Every note was a whisper, every pause a confession. She clenched her jaw, fighting the memories crashing into her like a storm. The first time he played it under the oak tree. The first time she told him she loved his music. The first time she realized she loved him. Now, years later, he was playing it again, not just for her, but for everyone in the room. A grand gesture. A public display of something that was once private. Something that used to be hers alone. She pushed back her chair abruptly, standing up. Liam's hands faltered on the keys. But she didn't look at him. She just walked away. The real fight begins. Liam found her outside, standing near the lake that bordered the film studio, her arms wrapped around herself. Elena. She didn't turn. His chest tightened. Why did you walk out? She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Because, that song didn't belong there. In that room. With all those people watching. He frowned. It was our song. Exactly, she whispered, finally looking at him. Ours. Not theirs. Liam was silent. Elena sighed, hugging herself tighter. You don't get it, do you? I didn't want a grand gesture, Liam. I didn't want you to play our song in front of strangers like it was just another performance. His face fell. I thought I was proving to you that. That what? She cut him off, her voice cracking. That you care? That you never stop thinking about me? He swallowed. Yes. Her laugh was hollow. Liam, I already knew that. His brows furrowed. Then what do you want me to do, Elena? She hesitated. Because the truth was, she didn't know. She had spent so many years believing she had lost him, that he had abandoned her. Now, she had to rewrite the story she had been telling herself for a decade. And that terrified her. Liam took a step closer. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix this. Elena's throat tightened. You can't fix this. His hands curled into fists. So that's it? You're just going to walk away? Again? She flinched. Don't do that. Do what? Make this my fault. His voice softened. I'm not. She shook her head. Then stop acting like just because we found the truth, we can erase the pain. Liam's face fell. I don't want to erase it. I just want to make something new. She stared at him, the weight of his words pressing into her ribs. Make something new. A part of her wanted to believe that was possible. But another part of her was still afraid. So she whispered the only thing she could. I need time. Liam's chest rose and fell with a deep breath. Then, he nodded. I'll wait. She turned to leave, but before she did, she looked at him one last time. And for the first time in years, she didn't see a stranger. She saw Liam. The boy she had loved. The boy she had lost. And maybe, the boy she could find again. A plan he didn't expect. The next day, Liam sat at the film studio, staring at his unfinished composition. Then, the producer walked in. We have news, he said. Elena suggested a new idea for the movie's ending. Liam's brows lifted. Elena? She wants the final scene to be a piano performance, the producer explained. A duet. Between you and her. Liam's heart slammed against his ribs. A duet? The producer nodded. She said if we're going to tell this story, we should do it together. Liam sat in stunned silence. He hadn't expected this. She had walked away from his song. But now, she was inviting him into hers. A slow smile formed on his lips. Maybe she wasn't walking away after all. Maybe she was just walking toward something new. The ribbon that tied their souls. The stage where it ends. Or begins. The lights dimmed, and the murmuring audience hushed to a low whisper. At the center of the Grand Theater, under the golden glow of chandeliers, stood a single piano. The final scene of the movie was set. Elena and Liam sat side by side on the piano bench, their fingers hovering over the keys, two people who had spent years as strangers, now about to create something together. This wasn't just a performance. This was their story. Elena took a deep breath. Liam glanced at her, his hazel eyes searching. "Are you ready?" he whispered. She nodded. But deep inside, she wasn't sure if anyone was ever truly ready for love to find them again. The cameras rolled. And then, the music began. A song of love and loss. The first notes were soft. Tentative, like the hesitant steps of two people finding their way back to each other. Elena played the melody first. A song of childhood. Innocence. The laughter that once echoed beneath the oak tree. Then, Liam joined in. His deeper, richer notes weaved around hers, not overpowering, not leading, just complementing. For the first time in years, they weren't just two lost souls wandering through different lives. They were together. And the music carried them back. Back to the letters that never arrived. Back to the nights spent wondering where the other was. Back to the heartbreak. Back to the love that had never truly left. Key after key, note after note, they played through the years they had lost. Elena's fingers trembled. And then, without realizing it, tears slipped down her cheeks. Liam saw them, but he didn't stop playing. Instead, he pressed the keys harder, pouring every unsaid word into the music. And suddenly, Elena understood. Liam had been speaking to her all along. Not through words. Not through letters. But through his music. He had never stopped waiting. He had never stopped loving her. And maybe, she had never stopped loving him either. The final notes drifted into silence. The moment the last echo faded, Elena reached for Liam's hand. She didn't care who was watching. She didn't care that the cameras were still rolling. All she cared about was the boy beside her. The one who had loved her through every note, through every memory, through every heartbreak. Liam's breath hitched when he felt her fingers lace through his. And then, she whispered the words she should have said long ago. "I never stopped believing in us." The audience erupted in applause. But for Liam and Elena, the world had already fallen away. All that mattered was this moment. Their moment. The ribbon's final place. That night, after the final scene wrapped, Liam and Elena walked together through the quiet streets of the city. Neither of them spoke at first. They didn't need to. The music had already said everything. Then, just as they reached her hotel, Elena pulled something out of her pocket. Liam's breath caught. The red ribbon. She held it between them, her fingers trembling. "I gave this to you once," she whispered. "And then, I took it back." Liam swallowed hard, his heart racing. Elena took his hand, slowly, deliberately, and tied the ribbon around his wrist. Liam stared at it, emotion crashing over him like a tidal wave. Elena smiled, her eyes soft. "I think," she whispered, "it was always meant to be yours." Liam cupped her face, his thumb brushing away the last of her tears. And then, finally, he kissed her. Not the rushed, desperate kiss of two people afraid of time slipping away. But a slow, deep, knowing kiss. The kind that says, "I found you again. And I'm never letting go." The forever they chose. Elena and Liam didn't rush things. There was no need. They had spent so many years being apart, lost in the noise of the world. Now, they wanted to get it right. So, they took it one day at a time. Liam composed a full piano album, inspired by their love story. Elena wrote a second book, not about heartbreak, but about finding love again. And one evening, a year later, they returned to Willowbrook. The oak tree still stood, its mighty branches swaying gently in the wind. Elena ran her fingers over its bark, her heart swelling. Liam stood behind her, arms wrapped around her waist. "You know," he murmured, "we never made a new promise." She turned in his arms, raising an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting another pinky promise?" He smirked. "Maybe." Elena laughed, but then her gaze softened. This time, they didn't need words. She simply lifted her wrist, where the red ribbon still rested. Liam kissed her forehead. "Forever?" She smiled. "Forever." And as the wind whispered through the leaves, the ribbon danced between them, no longer a reminder of a lost love, but a symbol of the love they had found again. Not just a love story. Their love story.